Welcome to the Way of Canaan. This is my story of searching for what truly matters when traditional spiritual institutions seem to be falling apart. Together, we'll talk about important faith topics, look at how they connect to history in today's world, and share hope for a better future. I'm Leon Longard, but feel free to call me Canaan. Well, I'm back. We're going to talk more about empathy today. Unnerving the empire with empathy, as I enter this series about. And it's been 2 weeks since I released part one of this two-part series on empathy, and a lot has been happening, particularly here in Minnesota, as most people know as they watch the news, things like that. And the situation has grown more intense in what's happening. We've actually right around the time I was releasing the first part of this is when Renee Good was shot and killed. And we've had one other shooting in Minneapolis since then. Um, Children now have been, there's stories. I have a friend who lives in the community where they have stories of children and students being picked up by ICE, basically abducted by masked agents. And all these things are going on, and things are growing in intensity. And yet you just see this continued lack of empathy toward people who are suffering now and those who are hurting. What really is sad for me is that a lot of times it's coming from people who profess to follow Jesus. Yet when they're commenting on a news story or a friend's post about it, they're bringing up these cliche, shallow, pseudo-religious sounding answers, trying to justify the lack of concern and justify what the administration is doing without really showing any care or thought for the people that are being harmed by this. Then even one time, a couple of days ago, I'm listening to the president speak, and for a moment, I thought there would be some empathy or even some sympathy expressed about the death of Renee Good. But it immediately shifted to this narrative of paid agitators and professional protesters and professional agitators, specifically pointing blame at the woman who had one of the observers who had videotaped the incident of her shooting and had started yelling at the ICE agents, shame, shame, and her voice indicated she must have been a professional opera singer that was being a professional agitator or something like that. And you just hear this and you go, can anybody stop and take a moment to really care for the people that are being hurt, whatever your political perspective on immigration is? How do we care for those who are sitting in their houses afraid, not because they've done something wrong, but because even if they are legally here, they're being picked up without concern and without any type of an option to validate their valid to show their validity of their residency here until they've been taken into detention. People are not using warrants, and people are showing their paperwork, and people don't care. We just see that continuing to happen. So we're going to talk more about empathy today in this episode. And originally I had three segments, three stories about empathy that I was going to share, so I thought it'd be one episode. And then I started to think about it. I felt like we needed something on really what I see as the connection between the modern version of sympathy and what I would call toxic charity. So that's why I added another section and decided to break this down into two episodes. So though the last episode kind of sounded like it was just segueing to another segment, here we are, 2 weeks later, back at it. uh, back to um, back to unnerving the empire with a little more empathy. You know, I sometimes feel that the times where I am feeling a connection or identifying with the most vulnerable people in our community are the times I sometimes feel closer to Jesus. And it may be because the entire Jesus narrative, the the reality of the life and the presence of Jesus in the world, and um, up to through his crucifixion and then his resurrection, really is a story of empathy. It in so many ways, because if you think about it, when you think of scripture where it talks about how Jesus, who was all God, took on the form of humanity and experienced what we experienced. He submitted himself to all of the trials that humanity faces. He had no need to for himself, but he entered into our world and really then understood our setting more than simply sitting in a divine realm somewhere. And to me, this is what part of the uniqueness of the Jesus narrative, um, compared to many other religions. And there was a recent experience I had where this really hit home with me again. Just a few weeks ago, I had traveled down to Indianapolis from where we used to live, from here in Minnesota, where we live now, to somebody was giving us a car. And so I needed to go down and pick it up and then drive it back. And with it short notice, most inexpensive way to go was going with Amtrak and then connecting to a bus to get down there. And to do it all in one transaction with Amtrak, since I had a voucher that I could use for it, I had to do the bus that would go to Indianapolis from Chicago, the Greyhound that would go to Indianapolis from Chicago at 10 p.m. at night, after it was the one that was connected to the route that took me to Chicago. So I'm on my way down to Chicago. Train ride's a little late, but not too bad. Get there with plenty of time for the bus to be there in time to get on that bus. Waited out, hung out in the Grand Hall for a while. Cool Christmas tree at the time. It was really fun to look at. And I had stopped because I was aware that Indianapolis was having a snowstorm coming through. And some areas of I-65 on the way down, just north of Indianapolis, had been bad. And so I checked with the customer service rep at the time, about 7 p.m. or so, whether or not they had heard anything about the bus being delayed or anything like that, or if that was going to affect the bus that I was supposed to connect with. And she was like, no, should be fine. Why don't you just go out to corner of Clinton and Jackson at 10 o'clock? They will meet you there. They'll pick you up there. So I'm kind of hanging out, had some dinner, enjoyed the looking around at the Great Hall. I mean, Union Station in Chicago is really one cool building. So I'm enjoying my time there. It's cold. It was going towards 0 degrees that night. It was probably, I think, the coldest night they had experienced so far. And so I go up to connect with my bus at 10 o'clock, along with about 8 other people. And we're standing there waiting, freezing, and there's no bus coming. We don't see a bus. So we kind of just keep kind of shifts, standing inside the building, going outside, keeping an eye on where the bus is supposed to be, not seeing anything. All the customer service reps had left for the day, so the only people there were the Amtrak security guards, police that, and we would check with them. They had no idea what was going on. So finally, somebody got a hold of their reservation line and an operator, right about 11:30 or so. And the person said, when that person called in, he said that he learned that the bus had been canceled because of the snowstorm. And when he asked what we're supposed to do, there's nobody there to help us, tell us what to do. And the security guards are telling us that we can't stay overnight. Midnight, they close the building. You got to leave. What are we to do? And he was like, well,
find a hotel and we hopefully will reimburse you for part of it. So I ended up in the process while we're waiting, got to know two other guys that one was a young Amish man who was going from Missouri back to Indiana. So he was going to be on the same bus with me going down to Indianapolis that night. And we had talked. In fact, he was the one on the phone. Really cool experience. You'd have to see his phone because they live as simply as possible, even as they embrace newer technologies. And it was this created phone with an old cell handset in a power tool case that he had a cordless drill battery to keep charged. He had rigged it up his own way, and it was really interesting. I was like very innovative. But anyway, side story there. And then we got another guy, young man, who was on his way from Boston to Portland and had missed the um, train going out to Portland coming from the east, really going out to restart life. Had had some difficulties in Boston and was going to go move out with a couple of friends and restart his life. And so here we are, three people who have just met each other, got to know each other a little as we're talking about the experience. And it's like, all right, let's work together to try to find something. Security guard said 2 blocks down, 3 blocks down, there's a Holiday Inn. We go to the Holiday Inn and it's booked. It's locked. I push the button and talk to the front desk, and they're like, "Sorry, we're full." I'd happened to had my phone was dying, but I had plugged in to the one young man's battery charger. He had two ports off of it to charge the phone, and got enough signal and got enough information to find another place down on Michigan Avenue that when I called them, they had a room that we could stay in. It was, for the two double beds and a roll away, we were fine, just the three of us for three adults, cramped old room. Nice hotel that probably in its day was a really nice one, but it's kind of falling on hard times and still tries to live with that prestigious hotel status. But anyway, so we had to walk a mile to that hotel. And as I'm walking, I mean, early on, the reality hit me that I could potentially be spending the night homeless in downtown Chicago with on one of the coldest nights of the year so far. And I had nothing, I didn't have enough with me for that. I didn't care. I had an extra blanket, and probably not enough that I would have been able to handle that cold. And all of us, I think, were in that situation. And then I'm walking down the street with these two other guys, and I'm just realizing how we just probably look like a motley crew of people that are just on a journey trying to figure out how to survive. And we're pulling our bags and we're walking a mile in the cold, all bundled up as best we can. And I began to think about Joseph and Mary as they are looking for a hotel or an inn or some place to stay in Bethlehem they when Jesus is about to be born. The Jesus nativity story. It's almost Christmas, so probably was um, part of the reason why it came to my mind. And that vulnerability that they experienced was something I was feeling that night. And I also looked around. And there was one guy that was in a very thick sleeping bag, laying on top of a heater vent coming out from underneath Union Station. And I was like, man, you begin to realize the challenges these people face when you're in that situation. Um, and we got about 3, 4 hours of sleep, and then we got up the next morning, headed off to our locations, caught a different bus with the young man going to Indianapolis, and we got a ride for the guy who was headed to Oregon to be at the station to catch his train. But in the end, that's where I guess, I mean, that's again where empathy helps me to look at that experience. And yeah, I had other ways I could have done the trip, but I think maybe the circumstances happens in a way that allowed me to experience that. It also, I look at the situation and I was thinking, these two other guys, I'm not sure if they would have been able to manage that situation alone without somebody else to help them navigate it all. So together there was a camaraderie that was joint that came out of it. And it was fun that we had opportunities to just talk about life. Some spiritual conversations happened in the midst of it that were really cool. Um, so it's like those experiences, though, just again remind me of the vulnerability of Jesus. And empathy helps me identify with other people, but it also helps me identify with Jesus. As I think about this topic of sympathy versus empathy, I've been talking a lot about empathy and why I think empathy is valuable, but I also think it would be good to look at how our modern form of empathy or our modern form of sympathy actually to me seems like a more toxic emotion. Some people have said sympathy is better, and I brought that up earlier. How that well, it's kind of this. It can distance us from the problem, and we don't feel that connection. And I think in the whole scheme of things, and as I see it, how it works out, particularly when it comes to care for those in need or loving our neighbors and watching out for the vulnerable, sympathy. Um, I have seen situations where I feel like sympathy was the emotion that led to some of the most toxic charity I saw, particularly when I was working with people experiencing homelessness in Indianapolis. Um, and there's a book I will share a link for in the notes called Toxic Charity, just basically that. Um, and it's one of the books on the topic that is does the best covering of this whole issue of charity and how sometimes we really hurt people more than we help them um, when we are um, when we try to just do particularly what I would call random acts of kindness. And I think that's because sympathy, we feel pity for another, we feel bad for them, and sometimes to help soothe our feeling of bad for somebody who we consider less fortunate or in need. Um, we look at the way how what can I do to make myself feel better? It tends to get down to that. And I saw it worked out in so many ways, working with people who were living on the street, living in encampments around the city of Indianapolis. We would see I'd be on my neighborhood chat page for um, on Facebook, and somebody be like, "Oh, did you see the people over here? I really feel, but I really don't want to like. I kind of don't know what to do, but I don't want to get too close." And people would be like, "Oh, just leave it on the edge of their camp and take off and everything." And I'd be like, "No!" Because when you just kind of have this distant connection with people and you don't take the time to actually listen to them, um, the when you don't take the time to listen to them to get to know what their real needs are, you tend to just give them what you think is best for them. And a lot of times people would leave. We would just come up to an encampment, and there would be boxes of perishable foods sitting on the edge of the encampment that nobody had eaten. One of the worst was people would leave apples, and most people that are homeless have problems with their teeth, and an apple is one of the hardest things for them to eat. It's painful, so therefore they won't. Or they would leave a bunch of bread, and all that does is attract rodents. It rots, it creates an unhealthy environment. And really, when camps would be closed, when the city would move in and say, we have to close this camp, a lot of the times it was because of the unhealthy environment that was created by people who were just trying to leave random acts of kindness and they'd leave a box of perishable foods. I remember one specific encounter. I was at a meeting where in Indianapolis, they have a unit in the police department that's specifically focused on people experiencing homelessness. And they do a lot to try to help keep safety in the camps and protect the people that are there and also reach out to them and try to help them find resources. But the last thing that they want to do is close the camp. But when it happens so often, they will just see this. There was one camp in particular that was doing well. Everybody was trying to help with it. And it eventually got to the place it was unmanageable. And one of the gentlemen who stepped out of his tent was looking at this pile of, rotting food. And he was like, where'd that come from? And that was the point that the head of the department was making, the homeless unit in Indianapolis was making, is that when people just leave stuff like that and nobody's asking for it, you it creates a situation that makes it difficult for people to continue where they're living. And there's a blog that I wrote a long time ago on that subject. I'm thinking about, I'll probably put it on my Substack as a um, reminder. It actually includes a picture of a friend of mine that was um, also doing outreach, working with animals in these camps. And she had a picture of some of the stuff that was left at one camp, and it was just terrible. It was horrendous. And there was another picture, maybe I'll even include it in the notes here, that a friend of mine who worked with the organization, one of the organizations I used to work for, um, she had posted a picture where she pulled up to, there's a church in downtown Indianapolis where they have one of those homeless Jesus statues. And it's a statue of Jesus sleeping on a park bench with a blanket wrapped around him. And somebody had left boxes of groceries and boots and coats and all these things for them. And I'm like, did anybody check if he had a pulse? And I think that's just the kind of stuff that we do sometimes where we feel sorry for somebody and we almost overload them. And a lot of times it's only to appease our own conscience. And that's why I would say between sympathy and empathy, particularly the cognitive empathy type of empathy, is the healthier emotion. I'm sorry, Turning Point and Elon. Um, Empathy is important. We need it. We need it more than ever. And I hope that we continue to see people learning how to have more empathy for one another. Blessings to everybody, and keep listening to the Spirit and holding out hope for a better day. This has been The Way of Canaan. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you want to follow along with other content that I am creating, as particularly posts and notes that I have on my Substack, just check out wayofcanaan.substack.com. Thank you.